The Secrets and History of Grand Central Terminal, Calming Sleep Story to Fall Asleep. Tonight, I have another quiet story to share with you. First, please turn the volume down a little and adjust it to a comfortable level. And if you think you may want to return tomorrow night, you may wish to subscribe now, so this channel will be easy to find whenever you are ready to sleep again. When you get into bed, thoughts about what happened today or what you need to do tomorrow may begin to fill your mind. And sometimes you may start to feel anxious, thinking, I have to fall asleep soon. At times like that, you do not need to force yourself to sleep. The human brain is designed so that, by gently directing its attention toward a quiet voice or sound, it can let go of unnecessary thoughts and naturally shift into a relaxed state. So, you do not need to try to listen carefully to the entire story until the very end. Simply let my voice pass by you, like quiet background music. And if your awareness begins to fade somewhere along the way and you quietly fall asleep, that is perfectly all right. Now, let us slowly begin tonight's story. Tonight, we are going to visit a place where thousands of journeys begin and end. A place filled with clocks, arches, stone, light, and the quiet memory of countless footsteps. We are going to Grand Central Terminal in New York City. Perhaps you have seen it in a photograph. Perhaps you have watched a scene in a film where two people meet beneath its famous clock. Perhaps you have walked through the building yourself, moving with the crowd across the polished floor of the main concourse. Or perhaps Grand Central exists in your mind only as a name, connected with the movement and energy of New York. For tonight, there is no need to hurry through it. There is no train to catch. There is no departure board to study. There is no need to search for a platform or push through a crowd. We can enter slowly, pause whenever we wish, and allow the long history of the terminal to unfold at an easy pace. Imagine standing outside on 42nd Street at a quiet hour. The traffic of Manhattan continues around you, but you do not need to follow it. Before you rises the great southern facade of Grand Central. Large arches open across the front of the building. Above them, a monumental clock looks out over the street. Stone figures stand around it, high above the people below. The building seems both practical and ceremonial. It is a place made for trains, but it is also a gateway, designed to give travelers a sense that their arrival in New York means something. The building we see today opened in 1913, but it was not the first railroad terminal on this site. It was the third. Its story reaches back into an earlier New York, when Midtown Manhattan looked very different, when steam locomotives approached through smoke, and when the future shape of the city was still uncertain. To understand Grand Central, we can begin before the present terminal, before the famous ceiling, before the four-faced clock, and before the marble staircases. We can begin with the railroads that drew people, goods, money, and ambition toward Manhattan. In the middle of the 19th century, rail travel was rapidly changing the United States. Rail lines connected cities and towns that had once seemed far apart. They changed the speed of business, the movement of mail, the shipment of food, and the ordinary experience of distance. New York City grew as commerce expanded, and railway companies searched for more efficient ways to bring passengers into Manhattan. One of the most powerful figures in this world was Cornelius Vanderbilt, often called Commodore Vanderbilt. He had built his fortune first in shipping and then in railroads. By the late 1860s, he controlled important rail lines serving New York, including the New York Central and Hudson River Railroad and the New York and Harlem Railroad. He wanted to bring several lines together at a central point in Manhattan. In 1871, Grand Central Depot opened at 42nd Street. It served three railroads, the New York Central and Hudson River Railroad, the New York and Harlem Railroad, and the New York, New Haven, and Hartford Railroad. The depot stood near the northern edge of the more densely developed city of that time. 42nd Street was not yet the center of Midtown that later generations would know. The original depot was an enormous structure for its era. It had an L-shaped head house with passenger facilities on the ground floor and railroad offices above. Behind it stretched a great train shed of metal and glass. The roof rose in a broad curve above the platforms, creating a vast interior space protected from rain and snow. Imagine entering that first Grand Central Depot in the 1870s. The sounds would have been different from those inside the terminal today. Steam engines breathed and hissed. Metal wheels moved slowly across tracks. Porters called to one another. Doors closed. Luggage was lifted and carried. The air may have smelled of coal smoke, hot machinery, leather trunks, damp clothing, and the city outside. The depot had 12 tracks and could hold many railway cars at once. It included separate waiting rooms for the different railroads, as well as restaurants, shops, a billiards room, and even a police station. High-level platforms were built close to the height of the train floors, making it easier for passengers to board. Only ticketed travelers were allowed onto the platforms, an arrangement considered innovative at the time. The great roof of the train shed was inspired in part by major European buildings, including railway stations and exhibition halls. The ambition behind the depot was clear. This was not meant to be a small local stop. It was intended to be one of the great stations of the age, a place that displayed the strength of the railroads and the growing importance of New York. Yet almost as soon as it opened, the depot revealed the difficulties of bringing heavy rail traffic into a crowded city. Tracks ran along 4th Avenue, the avenue later known as Park Avenue. At street crossings, trains, carriages, pedestrians, and other traffic came dangerously close together. Accidents occurred. Within a short time, it became obvious that the railway approach needed to be changed. Work began to lower sections of the tracks and place them in cuts and tunnels. Between the 1870s and the years that followed, trains approaching from the north gradually descended below street level. The surface above parts of the route became a broad boulevard. 4th Avenue was eventually renamed Park Avenue, a name that would come to suggest elegant buildings and valuable addresses. It is interesting to think that one of Manhattan's most famous avenues was shaped in part by the practical need to hide railway tracks and ventilation openings. Beneath the calm line of the avenue, trains continued to move. Above them, the city changed. The first Grand Central was built to solve a transportation problem, but the growth of New York quickly created new problems. Passenger traffic increased faster than expected. By the middle of the 1880s, the original 12 tracks were already crowded. An annex was added. More platforms were needed. More people arrived. More trains departed. The neighborhood around the depot also grew. Hotels, offices, shops, and homes appeared. The railway terminal pulled development toward it, just as a harbor draws warehouses and markets toward the water. The station was not simply responding to the city, it was helping to create a new part of the city. By the end of the 19th century, Grand Central Depot no longer seemed large enough or impressive enough. The building was expanded and reconstructed. In 1900, the renovated complex became known as Grand Central Station. This second Grand Central was larger, but it was still tied to the technology and limitations of steam railways. More trains meant more smoke. Locomotives entering the Park Avenue tunnel filled the approach with soot and dark exhaust. Visible could become poor. The air was unpleasant and unhealthy. Travelers and workers experienced the effects every day. Imagine a winter morning near the turn of the 20th century. A train from the suburbs moves south toward Grand Central. The windows may be clouded. Smoke gathers in the tunnel. The engineer watches signals through a dirty, shifting haze. The railway is powerful, but it is also struggling against the consequences of its own machinery. Railroad engineers had already considered electrification. Electric trains could run without producing the smoke of steam locomotives. They could be cleaner and better suited to underground operation. William J. Wilgus, the chief engineer of the New York Central, proposed electrifying the lines leading into Grand Central. At first, the plan was considered too expensive and was set aside. Then, on January 8, 1902, a terrible accident occurred in the Park Avenue Tunnel. A southbound commuter train passed signals in the smoke and collided with another train. 15 people were killed, and more than 30 were injured. The accident changed the discussion. What had once seemed like an expensive improvement now appeared necessary. Within days, the New York Central announced that its suburban lines into Grand Central would be electrified. New York State later prohibited steam locomotives from operating in Manhattan after a set date. The railway approach would be placed underground, and a new terminal would be planned for electric trains. This moment is central to the story of Grand Central. The present terminal grew from tragedy, but also from a decision to build something safer, cleaner, and more ambitious. The new technology did more than replace steam with electricity. It allowed the railroad to rethink the relationship between tracks, streets, buildings, and the city itself. William Wilgus saw that if trains ran below ground, the space above the tracks could be used. Streets could cross freely. Buildings could rise over the railway yards. The railroad could sell or lease what became known as air rights, creating value above land occupied by tracks below. In December 1902, Wilgus wrote to the president of the New York Central and explained the possibilities. Electric trains would be faster and cleaner. The smoky open cuts could be covered. New real estate could be developed along Park Avenue. The old station, only recently rebuilt, could be replaced by a two-level terminal with separate areas for commuter and long-distance trains. The idea was both an engineering plan and a vision for the city. Beneath the ground, trains would arrive on many tracks. Above them, people would move through streets, hotels, offices, and public spaces. The railroad would become less visible at street level, while becoming even more important to the life of Midtown. Perhaps as you rest, you can picture the idea slowly forming on paper. Members representing tracks curve and divide. Platforms appear beside them. Ramps connect one level to another. Streets pass over the hidden rail yard. A large concourse opens at the center. Around it, rooms for waiting, tickets, baggage, dining, and information take their places. In 1903, Wilgus presented a detailed proposal. It included separate levels for commuter and intercity trains, a main concourse connected by ramps, an expansive waiting room, a hotel, and a roadway surrounding the terminal building. The New York Central approved the project. The scale was extraordinary. The existing station had to remain in operation while the new terminal was built. Trains could not simply stop for 10 years. Passengers still needed to travel each day. Construction, therefore, had to proceed in sections, with old tracks removed, new tracks built, and railway service carefully shifted from one place to another. The project would transform not only the station, but a large area of Manhattan. Buildings were demolished, rock and earth were excavated. Steel, stone, concrete, electrical systems, tracks, platforms, tunnels, roads, and bridges all had to be coordinated. Thousands of workers would contribute. Before construction could fully begin, the railroad needed an architectural design worthy of the plan. The new terminal was intended to compete with the Grand Pennsylvania Station being developed on Manhattan's west side by the Pennsylvania Railroad. This rivalry between rail companies helped produce two monumental gateways to New York. The New York Central invited several prominent architectural firms to submit ideas. Reed and Stem, a firm with experience designing railroad stations, proposed a building that emphasized efficient movement. Their plan included ramps between levels and elevated roadways around the terminal. The firm was selected. A second firm, Warren and Wetmore, was also brought into the project. The two firms worked together, though not always without tension. Reed and Stem contributed much of the practical circulation plan. Warren and Wetmore helped shape the monumental Beaux-Arts appearance that would make the terminal one of the most recognizable buildings in New York. The result would combine movement and ceremony. Travelers would not merely enter a machine for boarding trains. They would pass through spaces designed to feel clear, impressive, and ordered. Light would enter through enormous windows. Ramps would allow people with luggage to move without constantly climbing stairs. The main concourse would serve as the heart of the building, where routes, people, and time came together. For now, let us pause at the beginning of that immense undertaking. The old station still stands. Steam trains still arrive. But behind temporary walls and beneath the noise of ordinary travel, a new Grand Central is beginning to emerge. Construction started in 1903 and continued for about a decade. It was one of the largest construction efforts New York had yet seen. The work extended far beyond the walls of the terminal itself. Tracks had to be lowered and electrified. Railway yards had to be rebuilt. Streets and bridges had to be rearranged. The entire system leading into Grand Central was being transformed. More than 10,000 workers took part. They installed enormous quantities of steel and laid many miles of track. Excavation created mountains of rock and earth. Ordinary horse-drawn wagons could not remove the material quickly enough, so the builders used trains and underground routes to carry debris away. Imagine the sight at night. Electric lights shine over pits and temporary tracks. Workers drill into rock. Signals glow through dust. A train carrying passengers passes slowly beside the construction area, and for a moment the work pauses. When the train is gone, the sound begins again. The old Grand Central remained active throughout most of the project. Hundreds of trains used the station each day. Blasting could be done only under strict conditions, often at night, and only limited sections of track could be removed from service. The builders repeatedly stopped to allow trains to pass. This must have required patience. A new terminal of unprecedented size was being constructed, yet the daily rhythm of the city could not be interrupted. Commuters still arrived in the morning. Long-distance passengers still departed with trunks and cases. Mail and supplies still moved. The future had to be built around the present. The excavation stretched across a broad area. Some buildings were demolished and residents were displaced as land was cleared. The work was expensive and difficult. Costs rose far above early estimates. Concat changed, schedules slipped. But the overall plan continued. The terminal's tracks were arranged on 2 levels. The upper level was designed largely for long-distance trains, while the lower level served suburban commuter traffic. This separation helped organize movement and allowed many trains to enter and leave without crossing one another unnecessarily. Above the tracks, the terminal building took shape. Stone walls rose. Arches were formed. Steel supported great interior spaces. Huge windows were installed to bring daylight into the main concourse. Roadways curved around the building, allowing carriages and automobiles to pass without blocking the streets below. The builders used ramps extensively. This was not merely an architectural preference. Travelers carried luggage, and railway stations were crowded. Ramps made it easier for people to move between street level, concourses, waiting areas, and platforms. The gentle slopes helped the terminal handle large numbers of passengers with fewer bottlenecks. As the underground railway complex developed, the land above it became available for new construction. Hotels, office buildings, and clubs rose around Grand Central. This district became known as Terminal City. The terminal and its hidden tracks helped reshape Midtown Manhattan. The Biltmore Hotel appeared across Vanderbilt Avenue. The Yale Club established its building nearby. The Hotel Commodore opened in 1919. The Gray Bar building followed in the 1920s. Passageways connected some of these buildings directly to Grand Central, allowing people to move between train, hotel, and office without always returning to the street. Later, towers including the Channon Building, the Lincoln Building, and the Chrysler Building transformed the skyline around the terminal. Warehouses gave way to skyscrapers. What had once been near the less developed edge of the city became one of its major commercial centers. It is difficult to separate the history of Grand Central from the history of this neighborhood. The terminal did not simply occupy Midtown. It helped create Midtown as generations would come to know it. As construction moved toward completion, the old station gradually disappeared. Sections were closed and removed. New spaces opened. Tracks shifted. Electric trains replaced steam trains on the approaches. Smoke began to fade from the underground route. The change from steam to electric power was more than a technical upgrade. It altered the atmosphere of arrival. The new terminal would not be filled with the same clouds of exhaust that had darkened the old station. Travelers could enter through underground tracks and emerge into a bright, carefully designed public interior. The architects planned the southern facade as a grand entrance from 42nd Street. 3 large arches framed tall windows. Above them, sculptural figures and a great clock would symbolize travel, commerce, and time. The building announced itself as a civic monument, not only a private railroad facility. Inside, the main concourse was created as the central organizing space. It was vast, yet its layout was meant to be understandable. Ticket windows lined the sides. Passageways led toward trains, waiting rooms, streets, the subway, and other parts of the terminal. The information booth stood near the center, giving travelers a natural place to ask questions and meet one another. High above, the ceiling presented a painted night sky. Stars and constellations spread across a blue-green field. The design was associated with the French artist Paul César Helou and represented the Mediterranean winter sky. The constellations were shown in an unusual orientation. Some later explanations described the view as the heavens seen from beyond the celestial sphere, while other accounts connected the arrangement to reverse sketches. Whatever the reason, the ceiling became one of the terminal's defining features. Imagine standing beneath it when it was new. Electric bulbs shine around the concourse. Light enters through tall windows. Above the movement of trains and people, the stars remain still. The ceiling offers the suggestion of open sky inside a building devoted to underground travel. The terminal used electric light proudly. Thousands of exposed bulbs appeared in chandeliers and fixtures. At a time when electric illumination still represented modern progress, the visible bulbs were not something to hide. They were a sign that this building belonged to a new technological age. Acorns and oak leaves appeared throughout the decoration. They were symbols associated with the Vanderbilt family and the idea that great things can grow from small beginnings. They could be found in carvings, stonework, clocks, and fixtures. A traveler rushing for a train might never notice them, but they quietly repeated across the building. The central information booth received its famous 4-faced clock. Its opal glass faces would become one of the best-known meeting points in New York. People would say, in effect, "Meet me at the clock," and trust that both parties would understand. Outside, above 42nd Street, Another clock was set into the sculptural group on the facade. Its Tiffany glass face was 13 feet across. The scale suited the building. Time was not a small private matter at Grand Central. It was displayed above the street, at the center of the concourse, and throughout the terminal, because every journey depended upon it. The building was almost ready. The final work continued, but the moment had come to open the new terminal to the public. At 12:01 in the morning on Sunday, February 2nd, 1913, Grand Central Terminal officially opened. More than 150,000 people visited on the first day. Many came not because they needed a train, but because they wanted to see the new landmark. They entered a building larger and more complex than the Grand Central they had known before. They saw the broad concourse, the staircases, ramps, clocks, windows, chandeliers, and celestial ceiling. They saw electric trains arriving beneath the city. They walked through a terminal that seemed to represent a confident vision of modern New York. The terminal was called Grand Central Terminal because the rail lines ended there. It was a destination, not merely a station through which trains passed. The name described its function, but it also gave the building a feeling of final arrival. For travelers from distant places, the end of the line was the beginning of New York. Perhaps you can imagine one of those early visitors. They step through the entrance and slow down. Around them, thousands of other people are doing the same. Some look upward, some search for a platform, some study the clocks. Some simply stand still, taking in the size of the room. The building is new, but it already feels as if it is meant to last. No one in that crowd can know everything the terminal will witness. They cannot yet see the soldiers who will pass through during wartime, the famous trains, the films, the demonstrations, the years of decline, the danger of demolition, or the restoration that will bring the stars back into view. For them, it is opening day. The stone is clean. The windows are bright. The future seems close. After the opening celebration, Grand Central settled into its daily work. A monument may look still from the outside, but a terminal lives through repetition. Morning after morning, trains entered from the north. Doors opened. Passengers stepped onto platforms. Evening after evening, the pattern reversed, and people left Manhattan for homes beyond the city. The terminal was designed for movement, yet it also created places to pause. Travelers waited beneath the high ceiling. Friends met at the information booth. Families gathered around luggage. Porters moved through the crowd. Clerks answered questions, sold tickets, and directed passengers toward the correct track. The main concourse became the heart of this activity. It sat near the geographical center of the terminal, a large public room where many different routes met. From there, travelers could move toward platforms, waiting rooms, the subway, restaurants, shops, or the streets of Midtown. If you were standing there in the years after 1913, you might hear the soft layering of many sounds: shoes crossing the floor, wheels of luggage carts, voices rising toward the ceiling, the click of ticket windows, announcements, the distant movement of trains below. None of these sounds would remain for long, yet together they would form the atmosphere of Grand Central. The terminal's practical design helped people move through this complexity. Instead of relying only on stairs, its architects used ramps to connect levels. Travelers carrying heavy bags could walk gradually upward or downward. Crowds could flow in broad streams rather than stopping at narrow stairways. This feature was admired and later influenced the design of other transportation buildings. Grand Central was not only a place for trains. From its earliest years, it included shops, dining rooms, services, and spaces for culture. The terminal functioned almost like a small city under one roof. A traveler could have clothing cleaned, shoes polished, hair cut, or supplies purchased. One small business became especially successful. In 1913, J.P. Carey leased a tiny space near the waiting room. From that beginning, his operations expanded into a barber shop, laundry service, shoe store, and clothing business. Later, he offered limousine service and transportation to the city's airports. Carey understood that travelers needed practical services and clear prices. At a time when terminal shops sometimes displayed their most expensive goods, his windows showed affordable items with visible price tags. His business grew because it served ordinary needs in a busy place. Below the public areas, Carey stored merchandise in an unfinished two-story underground space. Railroad workers came to call it Carey's Hole. The name survived even after the space found other uses. Grand Central accumulated such names and stories over time, as large buildings often do. Official maps described rooms and tracks, but workers created another geography through habit and memory. The terminal also became a place for art. In 1923, the Grand Central Art Galleries opened on an upper floor. The galleries were connected with painters and sculptors, including John Singer Sargent, Edmund Greason, and Walter Leighton Clark. Thousands attended the opening. The galleries included exhibition rooms, a foyer gallery, and reception space. A year later, the Grand Central School of Art was established on another floor. Students came not only to catch trains, but to study drawing, painting, and sculpture inside the terminal complex. Imagine the contrast. Far below, electric trains arrive and depart. In the concourse, commuters hurry beneath the stars. Higher in the building, an art student studies a model, mixes paint, or listens to an instructor. The terminal contains motion and stillness at the same time. There was also a newsreel theater, where people could watch short films and current events. There were temporary exhibitions and a museum devoted to railway history. Grand Central could entertain, educate, feed, and transport its visitors. The station's restaurants became part of its identity. The Grand Central Oyster Bar opened with the terminal in 1913 and occupied a vaulted space below the main concourse. Its ceiling was formed with Guastavino tile, a system of thin tiles arranged in graceful curves. The same tiled construction helped create one of the terminal's most famous acoustic surprises. Near the Oyster Bar is the place often called the Whispering Gallery. It is not a separate gallery in the usual sense, but a crossing beneath low tiled arches. Two people can stand in opposite corners, face the wall, and speak softly. The curved surface can carry the sound along the arch so that a whisper reaches the distant corner. Perhaps you have tried it. Perhaps you have watched two people smile in surprise when a nearly silent voice travels across the space. In a building filled with announcements and crowds, the Whispering Gallery offers a more private kind of sound. No one needs to raise a voice there. A quiet word can find its way. The main concourse itself invited visitors to look upward. The painted ceiling contained about 2,500 stars, with constellations arranged across the sky. Some stars were illuminated. The design created the feeling of a night sky suspended above the daylight and electric glow of the terminal. The orientation of the constellations became a subject of discussion. Soon after the building opened, people noticed that much of the design did not match the sky as an observer on Earth would normally see it. Explanations differed. One interpretation suggested that the artist had represented the heavens from a divine point of view, looking toward Earth from outside the celestial sphere. Another explanation involved drawings that had been reversed during the design process. The uncertainty became part of the ceiling's charm. It was not a scientific observatory. It was a symbolic sky inside a railway terminal, a place where travelers could stand beneath stars before descending to trains underground. Look for the constellation Cancer, the crab, and near it you can find a small dark patch. That patch would become especially meaningful many decades later. For now, in the early years, the ceiling was bright and the constellations were easier to see. The terminal's chandeliers also drew attention. Large fixtures held many exposed bulbs, and gold-colored details reflected the light. The bare bulbs express confidence in electricity. Today, when electric light is ordinary, it may be difficult to feel the excitement it once represented. In 1913, a building filled with thousands of glowing bulbs seemed modern and almost theatrical. The use of light connected the practical and the symbolic. Travelers needed to read signs and find platforms, but the illumination also created atmosphere. Grand Central was intended to impress from the moment a visitor entered. Outside, the southern facade presented another carefully designed scene. The great clock above 42nd Street was surrounded by monumental sculpture. The group, often known as transportation, included the Roman god Mercury at the center, associated with travel and commerce. Hercules and Minerva appeared beside him, suggesting strength and wisdom. The figures were placed high above the street, where most passers-by would see them from a distance. They transformed the facade into something more than an entrance. The terminal became a civic symbol, a building that connected modern railway travel with older ideas of movement, power, and knowledge. Across the building, acorns and oak leaves appeared again and again. They were linked to the Vanderbilt family motto and identity. An acorn is small, but it contains the possibility of an oak. The symbol suited a family whose transportation empire had grown across the country. You might notice an acorn carved into stone, worked into a clock, or formed in metal on a light fixture. Most travelers probably passed without seeing every detail. Grand Central was designed to reward both the hurried glance and the slow observer. The four-faced information booth clock became one of the terminal's most beloved objects. Each face was made from opalescent glass. Estimates of its value later reached many millions of dollars. Yet its cultural value may be even greater. For generations, the clock has served as a meeting place. Before mobile phones, meeting beneath the clock required trust and patience. A person arrived, looked around, and waited. Perhaps the other person was delayed. Perhaps they approached from another entrance. The clock remained above them, visible from all sides. So many meetings must have taken place there. Business partners, friends, parents, and children. Couples beginning an evening in the city. Travelers saying goodbye. People reuniting after long separations. The information booth itself became a center of ordinary questions. Which track? What time? Where is the subway? How do I reach a hotel? Where is the nearest exit? The questions changed, but the need for orientation remained. Grand Central was also connected to New York's subway system. The original subway line opened through the area in 1904, before the present terminal was completed. Later platforms served the Flushing Line and the Lexington Avenue Line. The underground complex became a meeting place of commuter rail, subway routes, streets, and buildings. A person could arrive by long-distance train, descend toward the subway, and continue to another part of the city without returning to the open air. Or a suburban commuter could move from a platform into an office building through connected passages. Grand Central made the city feel both larger and more connected. In the 1910s and 1920s, the district around the terminal continued to develop. Hotels and clubs welcomed travelers. Offline office towers rose. Passageways connected buildings to the concourse. The neighborhood became a center of commerce. The Hotel Commodore opened in 1919. The Gray Bar building was completed in 1927. The Biltmore Hotel and Yale Club stood across Vanderbilt Avenue. Each added another layer to the world surrounding Grand Central. The terminal's underground tracks created valuable space above. This system of air rights allowed buildings to rise over land still used by the railroad. The tracks disappeared beneath streets and towers, yet continued to support the life above them. Imagine looking down from high above Midtown in the 1920s. You see the roof of Grand Central and the streets around it. You see construction cranes and new towers. Beneath the visible city lies another city of platforms, tunnels, equipment rooms, passages, and rails. A train enters this hidden network. People above may not notice. A taxi turns on 42nd Street. A clerk works in an office. A guest checks into a hotel. A student studies in the art school. All these activities are connected, directly or indirectly, to the terminal below. Grand Central helped make Midtown into a new commercial center, but it also reflected a broader faith in organized movement. The early 20th century admired systems, electric power, rail timetables, communication networks, elevators, roadways, and buildings designed to manage crowds. The terminal was one of the great physical expressions of that faith. It promised that enormous complexity could be made graceful. Trains could arrive on dozens of tracks. Thousands of people could cross one another's paths. Yet the space could still feel open and comprehensible. Of course, no system is perfect. Travelers missed trains. Crowds gathered. Delays occurred. Luggage was lost. Questions were repeated. But the building gave order to the confusion. During the golden age of long-distance rail travel, famous trains departed from Grand Central. Names such as the Wolverine, the Water Level Limited, the Fast Mail, and the 20th Century Limited appeared on schedules and in advertisements. The 20th Century Limited became especially famous. It connected New York and Chicago and represented luxury rail travel. When it arrived at Grand Central, workers sometimes rolled out a red carpet for passengers. The phrase red carpet treatment became closely associated with this glamorous service. Imagine the train approaching after its long journey. In the cars, passengers gather coats and bags. Porters prepare to help them. The train slows in the darkness beneath Manhattan. Then the doors open at Grand Central. For some travelers, New York is home. For others, it is a destination imagined for years. They step onto the platform, follow signs upward, and enter the main concourse. The ceiling opens above them. The city waits beyond the doors. Long-distance rail travel in those years could be formal and elegant. Dining cars served meals. Sleeping compartments offered privacy. Travelers dressed carefully. The journey itself was part of the experience, not merely time between two places. Grand Central gave that experience a suitable ending. Its architecture told arrivals that they had reached an important city. Its scale matched the expectations created by the journey. The terminal also served ordinary commuters whose daily trips were less glamorous but more frequent. Morning after morning, they traveled from communities north of the city. They knew the platforms, passages, and exits by habit. They may not have looked at the ceiling every day. Familiarity can make even extraordinary places seem ordinary. Yet the building remained present around them. A commuter might hurry through the same arch for years, pass the same clock, descend the same ramp, and stand in the same part of the train. Grand Central became part of the rhythm of a working life. It is possible that many people remember the terminal not as a tourist attraction, but through small, repeated details. The sound of shoes on the floor, the smell of coffee, the temperature of a platform in winter, the view of the clock when running late, the relief of finding a seat on the evening train. A great public building gathers private memories. Most are never recorded. They remain attached to places in the minds of those who pass through. By the 1930s, Grand Central was one of the busiest railway terminals in the United States. The neighborhood around it prospered. The building housed exhibitions, galleries, a school, a theater, restaurants, shops, and services. It stood at the center of a transportation network and at the center of a growing district. Yet history would soon place new demands upon it. The world was moving toward war, and the terminal would become not only a place of commuting and travel, but a vital point in the movement of troops and military resources. During the Second World War, Grand Central took on a different atmosphere. Millions of servicemen and servicewomen traveled through the nation's rail system. Trains carried troops to training camps, ports, bases, and cities across the country. Grand Central became one of the important gateways in this vast movement. Additional ticket offices were opened to handle the traffic. Retired railroad employees returned to work. Women were trained as ticket agents to replace younger men who had entered military service. The ordinary staff of the terminal changed as the country mobilized. The main concourse displayed enormous patriotic images. In 1941, a photographic mural promoting war bonds covered much of the East Wall. Its unveiling was broadcast nationally and drew thousands of people. Later, another large mural replaced it. A great flag honored more than 21,000 New York Central employees who participated in the war. The windows of the terminal were coated with blackout paint. Because Grand Central was so important to transportation, officials worried that its illuminated windows could help enemy aircraft identify the building at night. The paint reduced the glow visible from outside. Imagine the contrast between the terminal of 1913 and the terminal in wartime. The same arches remain, the same clock watches over the concourse, but some light is hidden. Uniformed travelers move through the crowd. Families gather for farewells. News from distant fronts shapes every conversation. The United Service Organizations operated a lounge in the terminal for military personnel. The Servicemen's Lounge occupied space on the east balcony. It offered pool and ping-pong tables, a piano, chairs, and food counters. For people moving between assignments, it provided a place to rest for a few hours. A soldier might arrive after a long trip, leave a bag beside a chair, and listen to the piano. Another might write a letter. Someone else might sleep before the next train. Beyond the lounge, the terminal continued its endless movement. An organist named Mary Lee Reed played in Grand Central from the late 1920s into the 1950s. During the war, when she played the national anthem, commuters sometimes stopped in such numbers that traffic through the terminal was delayed. The station master eventually asked her not to play it because the crowds stood still to listen. It is a small story, but it reveals how music could interrupt the machinery of movement. For a few moments, people who had been hurrying stopped together beneath the great ceiling. Grand Central also contained spaces that most passengers never saw. Far below the concourse was a sub-basement known as M42. It held electrical equipment essential to the railroad. The room did not appear on ordinary maps, and during the war it was heavily guarded. According to accounts of the terminal's history, German agents landed on Long Island in 1942 with plans to attack strategic sites, including elements of New York's transportation system. They were captured before carrying out their plans. Grand Central's hidden electrical facilities remained protected. M42 became one of the terminal's most famous secrets. The public spaces above were designed to be clear and welcoming, but the building depended on an unseen infrastructure of power, controls, tunnels, and machinery. Think of the contrast. In the main concourse, travelers study the stars painted on the ceiling. Deep below them, equipment regulates the flow of electricity. One space creates beauty and orientation. The other keeps trains moving. Another hidden part of Grand Central entered popular memory as Track 61. This track provided an underground connection near the Waldorf Astoria Hotel. It was not part of the ordinary passenger experience. President Franklin D. Roosevelt is often associated with this route. During his presidency, he used private rail arrangements that allowed him to travel with greater security and discretion. A large elevator near the hotel could move a railway car or vehicle between levels, helping keep his arrival away from public crowds. General John J. Pershing also used the connection during a visit in 1938. The story of Track 61 has grown through retelling, and some details are described differently in different accounts. Yet the central idea remains. Grand Central contained routes for private movement as well as public travel. For most passengers, the terminal was open and visible. They crossed the concourse with thousands of others. But behind doors, below platforms, and beyond ordinary passageways, there were places connected with power, security, maintenance, and special access. Large buildings often create legends because no single visitor can see them completely. Grand Central is too complex to understand in one walk. A person can know the main concourse well and still be unaware of rooms only a few yards away. During the war years, the terminal was both familiar and strategically important. People met beneath the clock, but guards watched hidden equipment. Restaurants served meals, while troop trains carried passengers toward uncertain futures. The building absorbed these different realities without changing its basic form. By 1947, rail traffic through Grand Central reached an extraordinary peak. The terminal stood at the height of its national importance. Long-distance trains still represented a major form of travel, and suburban commuting continued to grow. For a time, Grand Central seemed permanent and secure. It was too busy, too famous, and too central to imagine losing. Yet transportation habits were beginning to change. Commercial aviation expanded. More Americans owned automobiles. New highways encouraged long-distance driving. The convenience and speed of air travel gradually reduced demand for many passenger trains. These changes did not happen in a single year. Grand Central remained active, but the direction was clear. The golden age of long-distance rail travel was passing. Trains that had once symbolized the future began to seem old-fashioned to some travelers. The terminal's financial position weakened along with the railroads that used it. Maintenance was postponed. Spaces were altered. Advertising signs appeared. Natural light was blocked. The building continued to function, but the care required to preserve its architecture became harder to provide. A public landmark can decline slowly. A roof begins to leak. Stone darkens. Metal rusts. A decorative detail breaks and is not replaced. One sign covers a window. Then another sign appears. Years pass and people become accustomed to the change. Grand Central was still grand, but its beauty became less visible. At the same time, the value of Midtown real estate created pressure to use the site differently. Developers imagined office towers rising above or in place of the terminal. The land seemed too valuable to remain devoted to a low, monumental building. The original Pennsylvania station on the west side faced similar pressure. Despite its vast classical spaces, it was demolished beginning in 1963. A new station was built below ground, while Madison Square Garden rose above it. The destruction shocked many New Yorkers. They realized that even a major public monument could disappear if it lacked legal protection. The loss of Penn Station helped inspire a stronger preservation movement and the creation of the New York City Landmarks Preservation Commission. In 1967, Grand Central Terminal was designated a New York City landmark. For the moment, the building had protection, but the danger had not ended. Only a year after Grand Central received landmark protection, a new proposal threatened much of the building. Penn Central, the railroad company created by the merger of the New York Central and Pennsylvania Railroads, leased development rights connected with the terminal. A plan was announced for a large tower designed by architect Marcel Breuer. Different versions of the proposal were considered. One would have placed a tower above the terminal. Another would have required major alterations to the southern part of the building. Although elements of the facade might have remained, important interior spaces could have been damaged or destroyed. To the developers, the project represented a way to use valuable property and gain revenue. To preservationists, it threatened one of New York's most important public spaces. The argument raised a difficult question. Was Grand Central only private property belonging to a railroad? Or was it also part of the shared heritage of the city? Could a landmark designation limit what an owner did with a building? And if it could, did that limitation go too far? The dispute continued for years. Penn Central challenged the city's decision. Preservation groups organized. Architects, writers, civic leaders, and ordinary New Yorkers spoke out. Jacqueline Kennedy Onassis became one of the most visible supporters of Grand Central. She had already taken part in preservation efforts elsewhere in New York. She argued that a city loses something essential when it removes the monuments that connect present generations with the past. Her words helped draw national attention to the terminal. The campaign was not only about stone walls or decorative details. It was about memory, identity, and the character of the city. Imagine standing in the main concourse during those uncertain years. Trains still depart. Commuters still cross the floor. The clock still marks the minutes. Yet above the ordinary routine hangs a question. Will this room survive? The threat may not have been visible to every traveler. There was no wrecking ball inside the concourse. But proposals existed on paper, hearings took place, lawsuits moved through the courts, and the building's future remained unsettled. In 1976, Grand Central was recognized as a National Historic Landmark. Public demonstrations continued. Supporters gathered to defend the terminal. The legal conflict eventually reached the United States Supreme Court. In 1978, the court upheld New York City's landmark law as it applied to Grand Central. The decision became one of the most important legal victories in the history of historic preservation in the United States. The terminal would remain. But survival did not immediately bring renewal. Grand Central had been protected from demolition, yet decades of neglect had left it in poor condition. The roof leaked, stonework deteriorated, steel rusted. Dirt and pollution darkened walls and ceilings. Commercial signs filled spaces once intended for light and architecture. Large advertisements dominated parts of the main concourse. A Kodak display occupied a prominent area. A Newsweek clock covered windows. The terminal's monumental spaces were still there, but layers of signage and grime made them harder to perceive. The celestial ceiling became almost unrecognizable. Years of smoke and dirt had darkened the surface. For a long time, many people assumed soot from trains was responsible. Later analysis showed that much of the staining came from nicotine and tar, produced during decades when smoking was common inside the terminal. The stars had not disappeared, but they were hidden. This image may feel symbolic. Grand Central's beauty remained beneath the surface, waiting for patient work to reveal it again. During the 1970s and 1980s, efforts were made to repair and improve parts of the building. The roof was resurfaced. Marble walls and floors were cleaned. Blackout paint left from the Second World War was removed from some skylights. New doors and information systems appeared. Metro-North Railroad took over commuter operations. Grand Central's role was changing. Long-distance inner-city service declined, while suburban rail remained essential. Amtrak continued to use Grand Central for some routes into the late 20th century, but maintaining two major inner-city stations in Manhattan was inefficient. After the Empire connection was completed on the west side, Amtrak could bring trains from the north into Penn Station. On April 7, 1991, the last regularly scheduled Amtrak train departed Grand Central. After nearly 8 decades, the terminal was no longer a major inner-city railway station. It became primarily the home of Metro-North commuter service. This change closed one chapter of the building's history. Famous long-distance trains would no longer arrive beneath the ceiling. Travelers heading to Albany, Montreal, Toronto, or other distant destinations would use Penn Station instead. Yet Grand Central remained busy. Commuters still depended on it. Its platforms, passages, shops, and concourse still formed part of everyday New York. The time had come for a more complete restoration. In the late 1980s and 1990s, Metro-North and the Metropolitan Transportation Authority developed a major revitalization plan. The architectural firm Beyer Blinder Bell, known for work on historic buildings, was commissioned to guide the restoration. The project involved hundreds of millions of dollars in repairs, improvements, and structural work. The goal was not to freeze Grand Central as a museum. It had to continue functioning as a transportation terminal. Trains would keep running, people would keep commuting. Shops and restaurants would remain part of the building. The challenge was to restore its architectural character while preparing it for contemporary use. Billboards were removed, stone was repaired, the facade was cleaned, windows were restored, cracks were filled. The copper roof and cornice received attention. Mechanical systems were upgraded. Retail areas were reorganized. The main concourse ceiling became one of the most dramatic parts of the project. Restorers cleaned away decades of dark residue. Slowly, the blue-green sky and its constellations emerged again. Imagine the work taking place high above the concourse. Scaffolding rises toward the ceiling. Conservators study the painted surface at close range. They test cleaning methods. A small area brightens, then another. What had looked nearly black begins to reveal color. The process was careful because the goal was not to repaint the ceiling as something new. It was to recover the appearance hidden beneath the grime while preserving the historic work. A small dark patch was intentionally left uncleaned near the constellation Cancer. It shows what much of the ceiling looked like before restoration. The mark is modest in size, but it carries decades of history. It reminds visitors that preservation is not simply about making an old building look new. It is also about remembering what time did to it. The dark patch has often been described as largely nicotine staining, evidence of an era when smoking indoors was ordinary. Thousands of people passed through the concourse each day, and the smoke of countless cigarettes slowly altered the sky above them. When the ceiling was cleaned, visitors could once again see the stars clearly. The transformation changed the feeling of the entire room. Light seemed to return upward. People stopped and looked. The restoration also addressed the monumental staircases. On the west side of the main concourse, a broad staircase had long connected the main floor with upper levels. Evidence suggested that the original architects had intended a matching staircase on the east side, but it had never been completed. During the renovation, the east stairs were built to mirror the west stairs. Stone was obtained from the original quarry in Tennessee, which was reopened for the project. New pieces were carefully marked so future observers could distinguish them from the original 1913 stone. This approach reflected an important principle of restoration. The new work should harmonize with the old, but it should not pretend to be something it was not. The building could be completed and renewed while remaining honest about its history. Other parts of Grand Central received similar attention. The former waiting room, later known as Vanderbilt Hall, was restored. The main concourse windows were repaired. The building's superstructure was strengthened. Departure information changed from older mechanical boards to electronic displays. One cast iron eagle from the original Grand Central Depot returned to the terminal. The eagle had spent years away from the site and was eventually installed above an entrance on Lexington Avenue. It became a link between the first Grand Central and the third. The restoration expanded shops and dining areas, but it also set aesthetic standards intended to protect the building's character. Commercial use was part of Grand Central's history, yet advertising and retail design could no longer be allowed to overwhelm the architecture. In 1998, the restored terminal was rededicated. The celebration drew international attention. After years of danger, decline, and patient work, Grand Central appeared renewed. For people who remembered the darkened ceiling and blocked windows, the difference must have been remarkable. The building had not been replaced. It had been rediscovered. A restored landmark can create the illusion that it was always safe and beautiful. But Grand Central's survival was not automatic. It depended on engineers, cleaners, architects, craftspeople, public officials, preservationists, workers, and citizens who believed the building deserved another century. The terminal that visitors admire today carries evidence of all those efforts. Some stones date from 1913. Some were added during restoration. Some surfaces show age. Others have been carefully renewed. The building is both original and continuously maintained. Preservation is not a single victory. A structure used by thousands of people requires constant attention. Water enters, salt damages concrete, steel corrodes, electrical systems age. Roads above the train shed place pressure on the structures below. Work must continue, even when the public sees only the finished spaces. Grand Central's restoration did not turn the terminal into a silent monument. It remained alive. Commuters rushed across the concourse. Restaurants served meals. Shops opened and closed. Events took place. Trains arrived and departed. This continued use may be one reason the terminal feels different from a museum. Its history is not displayed only behind glass. It is walked through every day. Now perhaps we can return to the terminal as a visitor, moving slowly through details that hurried travelers often miss. We begin again outside on 42nd Street. Above us is the great clock set into the sculptural group. Its Tiffany glass face measures 13 feet in diameter. Around it stand Mercury, Hercules, and Minerva, high above the traffic. Mercury, associated with travel and commerce, occupies the center. It is fitting that he looks over a terminal built by railroads and surrounded by business. Hercules suggests physical strength, while Minerva suggests wisdom. Together they create a symbolic welcome to the city. Below them, the arched windows bring light into the main concourse. Roads curve around the terminal, part of the circulation system imagined by the architects. Vehicles can move above and around the building, while pedestrians enter from the street. As we pass through the doors, the scale of the interior changes. The city street feels narrower behind us. The main concourse opens ahead. The floor stretches across a broad rectangle. People cross in many directions, yet the room has a center, the information booth with its four-faced clock. We can approach without hurry. The clock's opal faces catch the light. Accounts have estimated its value at more than $10 million, and some estimates have gone higher. But no price can measure the number of personal moments connected to it. Think of a traveler in 1915 waiting beneath the clock. then another in 1945, another in 1975, another today. Clothing changes, luggage changes, train names change, the clock remains. The booth below it has answered countless questions. Even in an age of smartphones, people still ask for help. A terminal is not only a map, it is a lived space, and sometimes a human voice is the easiest guide. From the center of the concourse, look upward. The ceiling rises far above. The constellations are spread across its green-blue surface. Orion appears, as do Taurus, Gemini, Cancer, and other figures of the zodiac and winter sky. The stars do not exactly reproduce the view from a New York sidewalk. They create a decorative heaven shaped by art, astronomy, symbolism, and perhaps an old reversal in the design process. There is no need to solve the mystery tonight. We can simply look. The stars are fixed while the people below move. A person enters through one door and disappears into a passageway. Another emerges from a train. A group pauses for a photograph. Someone looks at the clock and begins to walk faster. The ceiling creates distance inside the room. It makes the concourse feel larger than its walls. Perhaps it offers travelers a quiet reminder that every schedule exists beneath a sky beyond human control. Near the crab of Cancer, the dark rectangle remains. It is easy to miss. Once you know it is there, however, it becomes difficult not to look for it. The patch contains the color of the ceiling before restoration, darkened by decades of indoor smoke and grime. A small area was left so that the past would not be entirely cleaned away. Around the concourse hang chandeliers with many bulbs. Earlier versions proudly displayed ordinary incandescent lamps. The fixtures were designed when electric light itself was a sign of modernity. More than 4,000 exposed bulbs appeared throughout the terminal when it opened. In the early 21st century, many of the traditional bulbs were replaced with more efficient lighting. The shape and glow of the fixtures remain part of the historic interior, even as the technology changed. This is another way Grand Central continues to live. It keeps its visual identity while adapting systems that visitors may never notice. We can walk toward Vanderbilt Hall, once the main waiting room. In the early terminal, travelers waited there before departure. Over time, the room served different purposes. After restoration, it became a space for events and exhibitions. The walls and stonework suggest the seriousness with which railway travel was once treated. Waiting was not hidden in a small room. It was given architectural dignity. Elsewhere in the terminal, retail spaces occupy passages and balconies. Grand Central has always mixed transportation with commerce. The shops of today differ from those of J.P. Carey, but the basic idea remains. A traveler may need food, flowers, clothing, a gift, or a simple cup of coffee. We can descend toward the dining concourse. The sound changes as the ceiling becomes lower. The large open echo of the main concourse gives way to the closer murmur of restaurants and passing footsteps. Near the oyster bar, the Guastavino tile arches create warm, curving surfaces. The tiles are arranged in patterns that are both decorative and structural. They make the underground space feel handcrafted rather than purely mechanical. At the Whispering Gallery, stand in one corner and imagine another person in the opposite corner. Face the wall and speak quietly. The sound follows the curve overhead. A whisper that would disappear in an ordinary hallway arrives clearly at the other side. There is something gentle about this secret. It does not require a hidden door or forbidden room. It is available in a public passage. The architecture itself creates the surprise. Perhaps many proposals have been made there. Perhaps children have whispered jokes. Perhaps friends have tested the sound again and again, unable to understand how a voice can travel so easily. The oyster bar beside it has served generations of diners. Its vaulted room is closely associated with the terminal and has appeared in films and stories. People who are not taking a train come to eat there, showing again that Grand Central is more than a point of departure. Higher in the building, another unexpected activity has continued: tennis. Spaces once connected with broadcasting studios and other uses eventually became courts. The Vanderbilt Tennis Club occupies an upper part of the terminal and has been open to players willing to reserve time. A tennis court inside a railway terminal sounds unlikely, yet it fits Grand Central's long history of mixed uses. Art students once worked above the trains. Television programs were broadcast from studios. Businesses occupied corners and upper floors. The building has always contained more than most passengers realize. During the early years of television, studios above the Oyster Bar hosted broadcasts. CBS produced programs in the terminal. Edward R. Murrow's See It Now, including influential reports criticizing Senator Joseph McCarthy, was connected with these studios. So, while trains moved below, television images traveled outward across the country. Grand Central supported another kind of transportation: the movement of information. The terminal also appeared repeatedly in films, television programs, novels, and photographs. Its architecture makes it immediately recognizable. A filmmaker can show the main concourse for only a few seconds, and viewers understand that the story has arrived in New York. The building has served as a place for meetings, chases, farewells, reunions, accidents, and moments of wonder on screen. Films including North by Northwest, The French Connection, Carlito's Way, Armageddon, Revolutionary Road, and others used Grand Central or referred to it. Literary works also placed characters within its spaces. These fictional scenes join the real memories of travelers. Sometimes a visitor enters the concourse and remembers a movie. Sometimes a movie scene feels familiar because it resembles an experience the viewer once had there. Grand Central is among the most photographed places in New York. Visitors stand near the stairs, at the center of the concourse, beside the clock, or beneath the arches. Cameras point upward toward the ceiling. Yet no photograph fully captures the building. A picture cannot reproduce the layered sound, the movement of crowds, the shift from street light to interior light, or the feeling of descending toward a platform. To know Grand Central, even briefly, is to move through it. We can continue through one of the passages. Signs direct us toward tracks and streets. Some corridors are crowded, others feel unexpectedly quiet. A doorway opens into a shop. A stairway rises. A ramp turns gradually. Below us are platforms on two principal levels, built for different kinds of service. Grand Central has more platforms than any other railway station in the world, according to widely repeated accounts of the terminal. The number reflects the enormous scale of the original plan. The platforms themselves are less ornate than the main concourse. They are working spaces. Concrete, steel, rails, signals, lights, and signs guide trains and passengers. A train waits with its doors open. Inside, the lights are steady. A few passengers choose seats. Others remain on the platform. Soon the doors will close and the train will move north beneath Park Avenue. For a commuter, this may be the most familiar Grand Central of all. Not the stars or the sculpture, but the platform at the end of a long day. Trains leave the terminal through tunnels and covered approaches. Above them are streets and buildings. The hidden railway continues beneath some of Manhattan's most valuable real estate. This arrangement, born from Wilges's early vision, remains one of Grand Central's greatest technical achievements. The terminal created a layered city, rail below, streets above, buildings higher still. It also created a continuing maintenance challenge. Water and road salt from Park Avenue can damage the train shed structure beneath. Repairs require work on streets while trains continue to operate below. The same relationship that made Terminal City possible demands constant care. The building appears solid and permanent, but permanence is produced by maintenance. Grand Central has a lost and found tradition as well. Large numbers of objects pass through the terminal because large numbers of people pass through it. Wallets, phones, glasses, bags, umbrellas, and ordinary possessions are separated from their owners. Some accounts describe tens of thousands of items being cataloged in a year, with a surprisingly high percentage returned. More unusual objects have reportedly included musical instruments, artificial limbs, vehicle parts, and even animals. A lost object contains a small mystery. Who carried it? When did they notice it was gone? Did they retrace their steps? Did someone turn it in? In a terminal, people are often between places. Their attention is divided among tickets, times, companions, and luggage. It is easy to leave something behind. The Lost and Found office represents the opposite movement. Instead of sending people outward, it tries to bring objects home. Clocks are another source of stories. A popular claim says that Grand Central's clocks, or departure displays, are set ahead to give passengers a small extra margin before their trains leave. Different accounts describe this practice in different ways, and not every clock in the building follows the same function. What matters in the legend is the idea that the terminal gives a hurried traveler one final chance. Whether or not a passenger notices the difference, time at Grand Central feels unusually visible. A person looks at a clock, then at a track number, then at the distance across the concourse. Seconds become footsteps. For tonight, however, we do not need those extra seconds. We can let the clocks continue without us. As the 20th century became the 21st, Grand Central continued to change without losing its essential form. The building had survived the end of steam, the decline of long-distance rail travel, proposals for demolition, years of neglect, and a major restoration. It had learned, in a sense, how to remain itself while serving a city that never remained still. In 2013, the terminal marked 100 years since its opening. A century is a long time in the life of a transportation system. Technologies change. Companies merge or disappear. Neighborhoods rise and fall. Yet the central spaces of Grand Central were still serving the purpose for which they had been designed. People continued to enter beneath the great arches. They continued to meet at the clock. They continued to descend toward trains. The trains were different from those of 1913, of course. The passengers carried different objects. Leather trunks had given way to rolling suitcases, briefcases, backpacks, and phones. Paper tickets gradually shared their role with electronic systems. Mechanical departure boards were replaced by digital displays. But the basic human experience remained recognizable. A traveler still needed to know where to go. A person could still feel relief when arriving in time. A meeting could still begin beneath the clock. A goodbye could still take place beside a platform. Grand Central's 100th anniversary invited people to look backward, but the terminal was also preparing for one of the largest expansions in its history. For many decades, the Long Island Railroad brought passengers into Penn Station on Manhattan's West Side. Yet many Long Island commuters work closer to Grand Central and the East Side. Proposals to bring Long Island trains toward Midtown East had existed since the 1960s. The idea moved slowly through studies, debates, financial difficulties, engineering plans, and construction. In the 1970s, the city's fiscal crisis postponed the project. Later studies revived it. Work eventually began in 2007 on the East Side Access Project. The engineering challenge was immense. New tunnels had to connect Queens with Manhattan and reach deep beneath the existing Grand Central complex. The new station would not replace the Metro North platforms. It would be built below them. This created another layer beneath the layered city. Metro North trains already occupied extensive track levels under Grand Central. Subway lines crossed nearby. Streets, building foundations, utilities, and other infrastructure filled the ground beneath Midtown. The new Long Island Railroad station had to find its place far below all of this. Tunnels approach through the existing 63rd Street connection and new construction on both sides of the East River. Beneath Park Avenue, new caverns, platforms, passageways, escalators, elevators, and concourses were formed. The deepest parts of the new complex are more than 140 feet below Park Avenue and more than 90 feet below the Metro North tracks. A person traveling from the lowest level to the street needs several minutes. The journey upward becomes part of the experience. Imagine standing at the base of a long escalator. Far above, the upper landing seems small. The escalator begins to rise steadily. Walls and lights pass beside you. The sound of the lower platform fades. Grand Central Madison, as the new station was named, opened in January 2023. Long Island Railroad trains arrived on Manhattan's east side for the first time. The project increased rail capacity and created a new connection between Long Island and Midtown. The opening came almost exactly 110 years after Grand Central Terminal itself welcomed its first visitors. Once again, people entered a new rail space beneath Manhattan and looked around with curiosity. Grand Central Madison includes 8 tracks arranged on 2 levels with 4 platforms. It connects with the existing terminal through a large concourse, stairways, elevators, and dozens of escalators. One of the escalators extends for 182 feet, creating the longest escalator ride in New York City. The ride takes about 1 minute and 38 seconds. That may not sound long, but on an escalator, it creates an unusual sense of distance. There is nothing to do during that slow ascent except stand, perhaps hold the rail, and watch the upper level gradually approach. For a moment, the city's urgency is reduced to a steady mechanical climb. Art was included in the new station. Large, site-specific works by artists including Yayoi Kusama and Kiki Smith became part of the public environment. This continued Grand Central's long relationship with art, from the celestial ceiling and architectural sculpture to the galleries and school of the 1920s. The addition of Grand Central Madison did not erase the historic terminal. Instead, it expanded the transportation world beneath it. The original concourse remained above, while a new network opened deep below. A traveler arriving from Long Island can now rise through the new station and enter the older Grand Central complex. In a few minutes, the journey passes through architecture from different centuries. The new space is modern, but it joins a terminal whose history began with Cornelius Vanderbilt's depot in 1871. The connection is not only physical. Both projects responded to the same basic question: how can a growing city bring large numbers of people into Manhattan efficiently? The answers changed with technology. Steam gave way to electricity. Surface tracks gave way to tunnels. New levels were added beneath old ones. Yet the need for movement continued. Grand Central Madison also reminds us that the history of Grand Central is not finished. A landmark can have a past without becoming only a relic. It can continue to receive new passengers, new art, new systems, and new stories. The official history of the terminal describes preservation and revitalization as part of an ongoing mission. Grand Central must protect its historical importance while continuing to serve the region's changing transportation needs. That balance is delicate. Too much change could damage what people value. Too little change could make the terminal less useful. The building's future depends on maintaining both function and memory. We can see this balance in small details. Old stone stands beside new signs. Historic chandeliers contain updated lighting. A staircase built in the 1990s mirrors one from 1913. A modern electronic display occupies a space once filled by mechanical information. New tunnels connect to old concourses. Grand Central is not one moment preserved perfectly. It is a conversation between moments. Let us now take a slower journey through the terminal's time, not as a list of dates, but as a sequence of quiet scenes. First, there is the land near 42nd Street before Grand Central. Manhattan is growing northward, but the center of business remains farther south. The streets are less crowded with towers. Railroads approach from the north. Steam and iron define a new age of travel. Then comes 1871. Grand Central Depot opens. Its great glass and metal train shed stretches behind the L-shaped building. 12 tracks receive trains. Passengers wait in separate rooms for different railroads. Restaurants and shops serve them. The depot is considered enormous. Yet almost immediately, the city begins to outgrow it. Tracks along 4th Avenue create danger at street crossings. Sections are lowered. Tunnels and cuts appear. The avenue above becomes Park Avenue. By the 1880s, the depot is crowded. An annex is built. More tracks and platforms are added. The neighborhood develops around the railway. Near the end of the century, the depot is reconstructed and renamed Grand Central Station. But smoke from steam engines continues to collect in the approach tunnel. Then comes the January morning in 1902. A collision in the smoke kills 15 passengers. The tragedy forces decisions that had been delayed. Electrification becomes urgent. William Wilgus sees beyond the immediate safety problem. If electric trains can operate underground, the tracks can be covered. Buildings can rise above. The railroad can create value from air rights. A new terminal can organize commuter and long-distance trains on separate levels. Plans are drawn. Competitions are held. Reed and Stem bring railway planning and circulation. Warren and Wetmore bring monumental Beaux-Arts design. The practical and the ceremonial come together. Construction begins. Thousands of workers excavate rock, install steel, lay tracks, and build around an operating station. Trains continue to pass through the work. At night, blasting and digging reshape the ground beneath Midtown. The cost rises. The schedule stretches. Yet the project continues. Then comes February 2nd, 1913. At 1 minute after midnight, the new Grand Central Terminal officially opens. More than 150,000 visitors arrive on the first day. They see the main concourse and its stars. They see the exposed electric bulbs, the broad ramps, the information booth, the opal clock, and the great windows. They see a building designed not only to handle trains, but to represent New York. The years move forward. Hotels and office buildings rise around the terminal. Terminal City takes shape. The Commodore, the Gray Bar, the Biltmore, the Yale Club, and later skyscrapers become part of the district. Famous trains leave for distant cities. The 20th Century Limited carries passengers between New York and Chicago. A red carpet greets travelers. Commuters form daily rivers through the concourse. A person may pass beneath the painted stars thousands of times without stopping to look. Artists open galleries on upper floors. Students attend the Grand Central School of Art. A newsreel theater shows moving images. Restaurants serve meals. J.P. Carey builds a small empire of traveler services from a space of only a few square feet. The terminal becomes a city within the city. Then the world enters war. Troops pass through. A USO lounge provides rest. Women become ticket agents. Retired employees return. Blackout paint covers windows. Giant murals promote war bonds. Deep below, electrical equipment remains guarded. Secret spaces, such as M42, become part of the building's secret history. Franklin Roosevelt uses private railway arrangements connected with Track 61 and the Waldorf Astoria. Most travelers never know the route exists. After the war, rail traffic reaches its height. But cars, highways, and airplanes begin to transform American travel. Grand Central's long-distance importance declines. Maintenance is delayed. The ceiling darkens. Signs cover windows. Water enters the roof. Stone and steel deteriorate. Penn Station is demolished on the other side of Midtown. New Yorkers understand what can be lost. Grand Central becomes a city landmark in 1967, yet plans for a tower appear soon afterward. The terminal's future is fought over in hearings and courts. Jacqueline Kennedy Onassis joins the campaign. Preservationists gather. In 1978, the Supreme Court upholds the landmark protections. The building survives, but it still needs care. Through the 1980s and 1990s, restoration grows more ambitious. Billboards are removed. Stone is cleaned. Windows are repaired. The celestial ceiling emerges from darkness. A small patch remains to remember the years of smoke. The east stairs are built. New stone comes from the original Tennessee quarry. Modern systems are introduced without erasing the architecture. In 1998, Grand Central is rededicated. The world looks again at the building it almost lost. In 2013, the terminal reaches its centennial. In 2023, Grand Central Madison opens deep below, carrying Long Island Railroad passengers to the east side. The scenes continue. Tomorrow morning, someone will cross the concourse while thinking about work. A visitor will look up at the stars for the first time. Two people will test the whispering gallery. Someone will buy a ticket or a meal. A commuter will choose the same seat as yesterday. History is made not only by openings, accidents, court decisions, and restorations. It is also made by repeated, ordinary use. There are many ways to measure Grand Central. We can measure the diameter of the exterior clock. We can count platforms, tracks, bulbs, windows, escalators, or stars. We can calculate the depth of Grand Central Madison or the length of an escalator. These measurements help us understand scale, but they do not fully explain why the terminal matters. A building becomes important when people attach meaning to it. Grand Central has been a symbol of arrival, departure, modern engineering, New York ambition, wartime movement, architectural loss avoided, and historical renewal. For some, it represents the elegance of railway travel. For others, it is simply the place they pass through twice a day. For preservationists, it is evidence that a city can choose to protect beauty. For engineers, it is a system of extraordinary complexity. For a child entering the main concourse, it may be a room full of stars. For someone waiting beneath the clock, it may be a place of anticipation. For someone leaving New York, it may hold the final view of the city before a train carries them north. Grand Central is often called Grand Central Station in ordinary speech, though its correct name is Grand Central Terminal. The distinction comes from the fact that trains end their routes there rather than passing through. The confusion has become part of the building's identity. People use both names, and everyone understands the place being described. Nearby, a postal facility historically used the name Grand Central Station, adding another small layer to the story. The terminal's name suggests centrality. It is central geographically within Midtown, central to transportation, and central in the imagination of New York. Yet its history also reaches outward. The rail lines connect Manhattan with communities along the Harlem, Hudson, and New Haven routes. Long Island Railroad service now extends the terminal's reach eastward. Earlier long-distance trains connected it with cities far beyond the region. Every arriving train brings stories from elsewhere. Every departing train carries part of New York away. Perhaps this is why railway terminals often feel emotional. Airports can feel similar, but a railway station is closely tied to the ground. Tracks form a continuous path between places. A train does not rise and disappear into the sky. It follows a line that can be imagined across the landscape. At Grand Central, those lines begin below the city. They gather in darkness beneath the concourse, then extend north and east. If we could see through the floor, we would find tracks, platforms, tunnels, equipment, and trains waiting. If we could see through the walls, we would find passages, rooms, offices, mechanical systems, and old spaces with stories attached to them. The visible terminal is only part of Grand Central. The same is true of its history. Opening day is visible. The grand architecture is visible. But behind it are the plans, labor, maintenance, arguments, court cases, and daily work that allowed the building to remain. The famous ceiling required cleaners and conservators. The trains require engineers, conductors, dispatchers, signal maintainers, cleaners, electricians, and many others. The clock remains useful because people care for the systems around it. A landmark may seem to belong to architects and famous names, but it is sustained by workers whose names most visitors never know. More than 10,000 people helped construct the terminal and railway complex. Thousands more have maintained, repaired, cleaned, operated, protected, and restored it across generations. When we look at Grand Central, we are also looking at their accumulated work. Grand Central also changes with the hours and seasons, even though its stone walls remain the same. On a winter morning, commuters may enter wearing heavy coats, carrying traces of cold air into the concourse. Outside, snow or rain may soften the edges of the city. Beneath the terminal, however, trains arrive on their regular paths. The platforms offer shelter from the weather, and the great indoor sky remains permanently clear. In spring, longer daylight reaches the tall windows. Travelers crossing the concourse may notice the room growing brighter. The celestial ceiling does not change with the season, but the natural light beneath it does. Summer brings visitors from many places. Some arrive simply to see the building. They stand near the center, turn slowly, and try to take in the entire room. They may search for the acorns, the dark patch, the clock, the staircases, and the passage toward the whispering gallery. In autumn, the working rhythm of the city continues. Morning trains bring commuters from communities along the Hudson, Harlem, and New Haven lines. In the evening, the same tracks carry them away from Manhattan. The terminal receives all these seasons without needing to announce them. Its clocks measure minutes, while its stone measures decades. It is possible to think of Grand Central as a collection of thresholds. The doors from 42nd Street form one threshold. The ramps between levels form others. The edge of a platform is another. The moment when a train leaves the darkness and enters the terminal is another still. A threshold is neither one place nor the other. It is the point between them. Grand Central is filled with such points. People arrive from quiet suburbs and step into Manhattan. Visitors leave noisy streets and enter a vast interior. Commuters descend from the concourse to a platform, then rise hours later in another town. A traveler waiting beneath the clock stands between being alone and meeting someone. This may be one reason the building has inspired so many stories. Thresholds naturally suggest possibility. Someone can arrive unexpectedly. Someone can choose to leave. Two paths can cross. The terminal's design gives dignity to these ordinary transitions. A railway trip begins beneath chandeliers and stars. A daily commute passes through arches and carefully cut stone. Even when people are too busy to notice, the architecture surrounds them. The architects could have designed only a machine for handling passengers. Instead, they created a room that invites people to lift their eyes. That simple upward glance is repeated every day. A visitor enters, sees others looking up, and looks up as well. For a moment, attention leaves the schedule and rises toward the ceiling. The painted constellations connect the terminal with something larger than the city. They do not make the trains more efficient. They do not shorten the journey. Their purpose is different. They give the room imagination. The same can be said of the sculpture: acorns, oak leaves, clocks, and ornamental stone. These details transform infrastructure into architecture. Yet Grand Central's beauty never completely hides its practical purpose. Track numbers remain visible. Announcements continue. Passengers line up. Doors open and close. The terminal is beautiful because it works, and it works within beauty. Over more than a century, millions of people have experienced that combination. Most entered for practical reasons. They had somewhere to be. But even a rushed journey could contain a brief impression: sunlight through the windows, the glow of a chandelier, the curve of a ramp, or the sight of the clock above the crowd. Perhaps a person remembers Grand Central from childhood. They held an adult's hand while walking across the enormous concourse. The ceiling seemed impossibly high. The crowd seemed endless. Years later, they returned as a commuter and crossed the same floor without hesitation. Perhaps another person remembers arriving in New York for the first time. The journey ended below ground. They followed other passengers upward and suddenly entered the main concourse. The building became their first image of the city. Perhaps someone else remembers leaving. They looked back before descending to a train, knowing they would not return for a long time. These memories are not recorded in architectural plans, but they are part of the terminal's history. A public place belongs partly to everyone who uses it. No single person owns all its meaning. Grand Central belongs to the railroad system, to the city, to preservation history, and also to individual memory. This shared ownership of meaning helped save it. People defended Grand Central because they saw more than real estate. They saw a place that had become woven into the life of New York. When the terminal was restored, the work revealed not only architecture, but affection. The cleaned ceiling mattered because people had missed the stars. The reopened windows mattered because people wanted the concourse to feel bright again. The repaired stone mattered because the building represented continuity. Today, a visitor may enter without knowing how close Grand Central came to destruction. The terminal looks secure. Its arches appear too massive to threaten. But history shows that even great buildings depend on decisions. Someone must decide to repair rather than replace. Someone must argue that beauty has value. Someone must find a way for old architecture and modern transportation to coexist. Grand Central is the result of many such decisions. And so, when we stand beneath its ceiling, we are standing inside a building made not only of stone and steel, but of choices repeated across generations. Now the terminal grows quieter in our imagination. It is late. The busiest part of the day has passed. A smaller number of travelers cross the main concourse. Their footsteps have more space around them. The clock remains illuminated at the information booth. Its four faces look in four directions. The chandeliers glow. High above, the constellations remain in their reversed and mysterious order. Outside, traffic continues along 42nd Street. The sculpted figures above the facade stand in darkness and light. Mercury watches over travel. Hercules and Minerva remain beside him. Below, a train waits at a platform. Its windows form a line of pale rectangles. A conductor walks beside it. A few passengers board. Somewhere in the building, a worker cleans a floor. Somewhere else, equipment is checked. A restaurant closes. A door is locked. Information changes on a display. Grand Central is never only the grand public room. It is also all these quiet tasks. Perhaps a final pair of visitors stands at the whispering gallery. One person faces a tiled corner and says something too softly for anyone nearby to hear. Across the arch, the other person smiles. Perhaps someone pauses beside the dark patch on the ceiling and remembers how much of the sky once looked that way. Perhaps another traveler finds the small acorn shapes carved into the building and wonders how many years they passed unnoticed. We can walk once more through the main concourse without needing to reach any destination. On one side is the staircase. On the other, its later twin. The stone looks as if both have always been there, though one belongs to the original terminal and the other to the restoration. This quiet symmetry tells the story of Grand Central well. The building is historic, but not frozen. It is completed and recompleted by different generations. We pass the information booth. We do not need to ask a question tonight. We look up at the stars. We do not need to determine whether we are seeing the heavens from Earth, from beyond the celestial sphere, or through the confusion of an old drawing. We simply allow the painted sky to remain above us. The terminal has witnessed more than a century of hurry, but it does not hurry itself. Stone arches do not rush. The clock moves at the same pace whether the concourse is crowded or empty. The stars remain fixed while people come and go. The building reminds us that movement can exist inside stillness. A train departs. The sound fades into the tunnel. Another train will arrive later. This pattern existed before any person now in the concourse was born, and it may continue after all of them are gone. The terminal receives one generation and then another. In 1871, people looked at Grand Central Depot and thought it enormous. By 1900, the city had already outgrown it. In 1913, the present terminal seemed like the height of modernity. By the late 20th century, it needed rescue. In 2023, new platforms opened far below. Each generation sees the building differently, yet every generation can look up. Before we leave Grand Central, we can remember a few simple images from tonight's story. A steam locomotive approaching through smoke. William Wilgus imagining electric trains beneath Park Avenue. Thousands of workers building around an active railway. The doors opening just after midnight on February 2nd, 1913. The first-day visitors entering beneath the arches. A red carpet beside the 20th Century Limited. Art students working above the trains. Servicemen resting in the wartime lounge. A hidden electrical room deep below the concourse. A president arriving by a private underground route. A dark ceiling waiting to be cleaned. Preservationists standing against demolition. New stone rising to form the east stairs. A small stained patch left beside the painted crab. A whisper traveling along a tiled arch. A long escalator carrying passengers upward from Grand Central Madison. And, at the center of it all, a four-faced clock watching people meet, wait, hurry, and say goodbye. These images do not need to remain clear. You do not need to remember the dates or names. Let them pass slowly, one after another, like train windows moving through the night. Perhaps you are still listening. Perhaps your attention has already begun to drift. Either is perfectly all right. Grand Central has always been a place between one state and another, between city and suburb, between arrival and departure, between waiting and movement, between the visible building and the hidden tracks below. Sleep is also a gentle passage. There is no need to force it. You can simply rest here for a while beneath the quiet stars of the main concourse. The clock continues, but you do not need to follow it. The trains continue, but you do not need to board. The announcements fade into the distance. The footsteps become softer. The great windows darken toward night. Far below, rails extend into tunnels. Far above, the painted constellations remain. Grand Central has stood through years of change because people chose to preserve what was valuable while allowing the building to continue living. Stone, steel, light, and memory came together there, creating a place that is both useful and beautiful. Now we can leave it quietly, without closing a door behind us. The information booth grows smaller in the distance. The opal clock continues to glow. The ceiling becomes a calm field of stars. And the terminal, which has welcomed so many travelers, can remain where it is until another night, another story, or another journey. For now, there is nowhere else you need to go. You can let the city move without you. You can let the trains carry other travelers home. You can let this story become quieter and quieter until the words no longer need your attention. And if sleep is already near, you may simply allow it to arrive.